Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Now that we are at the top of the hour, we're going to go ahead and start things off. But before I introduce our presenters, I just want to cover a bit of housekeeping information with you. We will be recording today's session, so keep an eye on your inbox for a link to the recording in the days following the event. Feel free to use that for review or to share with a colleague. Also, if you have any questions for our presenters, please feel free to direct them via the chat and/or Q&A window, and we'll do our best to address everyone's questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. So without much ado, I know we've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to introduce Jason Smith and Jack Smith, who are going to take us through today's presentation.
Thank you, Ray Swanson. Glad to be here today, and we had an incredible response to this webinar, so we're looking forward to going through it. And I am very proud to have Jack Smith on as one of our system engineers who has taken hundreds of companies through migrations or coexistence with Windows. So first-hand knowledge here with, we're lucky to have Jack. No relation that we know of, right, Jack?
Not that I know of, but who knows?
Would love to see shout-outs on Twitter. We have dozens and dozens of people on, and I know many of you are on Twitter, and would love to see any of those hashtags right down there in the corner of the screen on Twitter. And from time to time, we do contests on Twitter, so it's good if you will follow Liquidware, and it's good, then we'll give you a follow back. But anything with any of the hashtags that you see there are our Twitter handle. We would love to see you, and we'll give you a response during or after the webinar. Liquidware provides adaptive workspace management. Now, you may have tools in your solution set that provide some of what Liquidware does, or scripts that do some of the things, but we pull this all together in one workspace management suite known as Liquidware Essentials. The products provide user environment management, application layering, and visibility that work across virtual cloud and physical environments. So see what I mean? We provide this for every way that Windows is delivered, whether it's virtual, cloud, or physical. The products are ProfileUnity with user environment management. It provides profile management, policy management, access to user authored data, and so much more beyond just making a persistent profile stick. It is complemented by an application layering technology known as FlexApp. So FlexApp application layering delivers applications in addition to the base image without having to modify that base image. And then we have Stratusphere that brings in the monitoring and diagnostics to know the user experience of any Windows environment from any time through planning and onboarding to providing everyday monitoring and diagnostics so you can troubleshoot your environments, head off negative trends in user experience before they become mission critical issues in your environment. And also it is part of this holistic adaptive workspace management suite that helps be the tie that binds every way you deliver Windows across all your desktops. Products are available as a suite, and they're available a la carte. Today, we'll spend most of our time speaking about our user environment management solution, ProfileUnity, which can help with a Windows 7 to 10 migration. We're going to give you some background about Windows 7 and where we are in the industry with the movement to Windows 10. As of today, as of right now, there is 299 days left until security updates, standard security updates in for Windows 7. And that means you need to have a plan to get onto Windows 10 or to provide a desktop of an alternative means with another operating system. At least path of resistance obviously is going to be Windows 10. It's going to be most compatible with your applications. So that's the direction that most organizations will move. This is a screenshot obviously from Microsoft's own website to the right of this week with the official date of it of January the 14th. And there's ways and methods that they're providing to move people over. If you stay on Windows 7, extended support options are going to be very expensive. This is news just from the recent weeks ago, and I pulled together this week for this webinar information coming directly from Microsoft, and I was tipped off by a publication called TechSpot.com. Here's the metrics. If you stay on Windows 7 and you want official security supports, in other words, extended support for Windows 7, you'll be charged for the first year $25 per machine if you're running Windows 7 Enterprise. If you're running Windows 7 Pro, $50 per machine. If you remain on that second year, your price will double on both or either operating system, and then triple from the original amount, and more than triple. It'll double again from the second year to the third year. So it can be very expensive if you plan on staying on Windows 7. So have a plan in motion, whether it's getting your applications to new Windows 10 desktops by something as simple as RDS, publishing those applications, or moving all your desktops over to Windows 10 well before the deadline. You need to have a plan, or otherwise you'll be paying for extended support options. Interestingly enough, Microsoft in the last few months, in conjunction with their Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop, have extended an olive branch, a little get out of jail free card for a while, where you won't have to pay these rates if you want extended support. If you move over to Windows 7 on WVD, which has just been announced as the public preview starts today. That was announced earlier today out of Amsterdam. The public preview starts today for WVD. I'm not sure about the Windows 7 portion of it yet, how that's going to look, because it's all focused on Windows 10 for now. If you run in that, you will not have to pay, they say, any price for 3 years of extended support. So that will take you through. And this is official for Microsoft. You can read more about this on, if you Google it. And we've also are strong partners within the Microsoft WVD ecosystem. And this dates back to more than a year ago, and it was announced in September of last year for full user environment management beyond basically making a profile disk stick full cross, and we'll talk about some of that today, cross Windows 7 to 10, application layering and monitoring and diagnostics. You can read more about a webinar we recently did a few weeks ago here on this link. Now look at your chat window, because that link will pop up in your chat window here shortly. And if you want to see that webinar, you can see that, and we encourage you to view that later. But know that that exists out there, how we fit, how Liquidware helps with Microsoft WVD, the nuances in there of their technology versus how we extend the functionality of it and helps you get on to something like WVD, so you can not have to pay that Windows 7 tax. But we highly encourage you to migrate. Where are we in the industry or worldwide with desktops running Windows 7 to 10? It's interesting. I pulled this data this week from netmarketshare.com, which does a great job for aggregating what operating systems that the world is on. And this is reported by your browser in the background when you're browsing websites, for example. So that's how they grab a lot of that data. We're at an inflection point for Windows 7 to Windows 10. In the last couple of months, you see that we indeed are at almost a halfway point. About 40% is on Windows 10 of the world, 40% is on Windows 7, and then you have obviously a few other operating systems that run desktop experiences in the world, including Mac OS and Linux and others. So and Windows 8 still out there, by the way, as well. But we're at an inflection point. So if you are halfway there to Windows 10, or at least you plan to be there very quickly, you are right on track. But as we've said, the clock is ticking. So now that we've pointed out the deadline, we've pointed out where you are, you can do a quick self-assessment in your mind where you are in that movement to Windows 10, and other methods that you have for Windows 7, other options. Let's talk about how you can easily tackle getting your Windows 7 desktops over to Windows 10, and more importantly, your users, and making sure that they're productive and they don't lose any production time along the way. The top 3 challenges of moving the desktops over should be ensuring that your users remain productive during the whole process, that there's zero user downtime, really. That's the most ideal use case scenario. And remember, us as administrators are, as C-level executives, responsible for the desktops in your organization. You need to remember that your customer is first. They're the reason why your job exists, right? So you want to make sure that they're ultimately happy as you move them down that path or up that path, I should say, to Windows 10. Number 2, your applications. You want to make sure that the applications that they need to do their job indeed are available in that new operating system, and that you have a method for knowing what those applications are what they actually use today, so you know what to bring across and which ones are compatible to bring across and how to deliver them. And number 3, you want to consider your hardware. Can you repurpose old hardware to run Windows 10? And how do you know that? With an aggregate report to help you control cost, ensure compatibility with Windows 10 and the applications you need to come across, and also to ensure it's a quality desktop, to ensure that you are providing a quality desktop to the user. And when I say hardware, of course, I mean end user desktop PCs, but also in VDI and virtual control environments. That means the hardware that's running and the resources that are running that out of your data center or cloud. So let's start with the users. Your most important customer. Your most important customer for your job is your user base. So these questions really should be first to mind. How can you capture the goodwill that they're doing today on their operating system, and how they're productive to be able to bring that into the Windows 10 session so they can do that seamlessly? Which users do you want to consider migrating first if you want to do them in waves? How can you ensure that user authored data is cleanly off of the endpoints or the persistent desktops, and make sure that is backed up? Because this is mission critical data to your organization. Your organization may be hurt business-wise if you lose files, obviously. And you would be surprised if you have got best data practices in place to have folder redirections. You'd be surprised at the amount of customers that do not have that in place. So some of you I'm speaking to, others I'm not. But don't be ashamed if you don't have best data practices in place. We're going to show you how to solve that today. How can you make sure that users have zero user downtime along the way? Now, this is an important bit because there's plenty of solutions out there that take a machine offline, and there's plenty of solutions out there that would have a user down for several hours or have you working over an entire weekend to make sure that the user can be back up and live on Monday. But how can we do that without any of the headaches I just mentioned? We'll share that with you today. And is there a better way to handle large profiles? Profiles have gotten larger over time. Now, regardless if you want to bring your profile across or not, you need to think about the way that profiles have changed and how you want to deliver them in the new environment, because large profiles like the cache of Office 365 and OneDrive, how you make those available in non-persistent desktops for virtual desktops, how you make them available as large profiles in persistent desktops, very much considerations that you should make. So if you look at the first challenge there, user profiles and data are not dynamic. They are static to a individual PC or desktop or virtual environment for the Windows OS itself. And that's because Windows OS changes historically have largely broken profiles, that you could not easily have those go across from one environment to the next. I think we'd all agree that a profile loss causes a lack in productivity. I mean, how many times have you reset a corrupt profile for a user where they've been issued a temporary profile and it really ruins not only their day, but the next few weeks, and them recreating bits of their profile, whether it's something as simple as their Outlook signature or also spell checkers or other things that may be helping keep them productive in their applications of choice. We mentioned this before, but user authored data is mission critical and you need a plan to move that across. And you should admit that user state migration tool processes that do an import and export to get you over to a new operating system are pretty much inefficient. They work, but there is user downtime associated with them, and there is pain to scale those, and they're often a one-way only process. So if you have a mixed environment, they would not work across those. It's good to know, and here comes the commercial bit, right, that ProfileUnity can solve all those challenges that we mentioned in there. Profiles, once they're managed under ProfileUnity, are compatible. They're not migrated over. They actually get played back to the right place in Windows to work. They're both backward and forward compatible. So the best time to implement a solution like ProfileUnity that makes your profiles dynamic is before you move users over to the new operating system. Get them under management today. User authored data, you can make sure that it is redirected out of the shell folders. This is a best practice by Microsoft. They've issued for any enterprise. You should at a minimum have those redirected to a UNC file path and protected and backed up. or you can also sync those to cloud storage, but you need a standard in place. And how do you harvest those off of the endpoints? We'll show you that in the coming slide. Because if you can do that in the background, that keeps users productive. You don't have to use a user state migration tool driven approach, and it's a seamless switch over when it happens. Because you're ending the migration cycle. A user under management with ProfileUnity is ready for your next migration, whether you're switching over to another way of managing Windows or a different version of the operating system, which may be broken between versions. Windows 10 was announced. You'll remember that there were a lot of headlines out there that said it's the one OS that's going to rule them all. But now we've had many versions of Windows 10, and you will see that on the coming slide because we've documented this, and you'll be able to see it all in one place. Here is Jack will be able to speak to that. Which versions of Windows work for the profile, forward or backward or sideways? And we'll see that in a minute. But Windows 10 is the one OS to rule them all, or has been so far in name. So the name hasn't changed, but the bits sure have. The start menu sure has. The way that some of the apps store data sure have as well. Jack Smith is one of the foremost experts on Windows profile versions, I would say anywhere. And like I said earlier, we're proud to have him in here. I'd like him to speak to this slide, going all the way back to XP, what we've looked at for version numbers of profiles.
Sure, thank you. So what you're looking at here is obviously the profile versionings. Now, as you go down the chain, you can see obviously your version 1 was your XP, version 2 is your Windows 7, and these are all kind of universal numbering. The ones in the later revisions where you see from 1703 through where it's .1, that's not technically an official version number. That's just what I personally have signified as a slightly different variant on what is in essence a V6 profile. Now, under the hood, is it going to say V6? Yes. In reality, is it actually a V6 in the different building revisions? Kind of. And I'll explain that a little bit further. But going from your V2 to ultimately a V3 or 4, right? So if you want to translate this into more of a terminal server world, 2008 to 2012, you're going from V2 to V4. Introducing into Windows 10, you started to have a V5, which lasted about a year, and then they quickly changed to a V6, which lasted about a year or so, and then it quickly changed over to a V6.1, and has been kind of more or less static in the V6.1, V6.2, V6.3 arena all the way up the chain. So in essence, can you go from a 1703 release of Windows 10 all the way up to the latest insider build of 1909? And the answer is yeah, you can. You can go up the chain with the profile with, well, let's go very minimal issues whatsoever from A to B. Now the gotcha though can be, okay, now that I've gone from my 1703 release to the latest 1903 that might be coming out in a month or so, I'm not necessarily doing an overnight migration, right? I'm not ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, okay, we're gonna just take everybody and move them to the newest version of the operating system and there's no going back. Because there's usually during my testing phase, this user has to test back and forth between the operating system types until we officially go, okay, now we're ready to move on to the latest release. We've done our testing pool. We're going to move forward with the next release, and this should be good for the foreseeable future. And we'll get into the versionings and the dates on that. But the problem is that that's not how most organizations work. There's usually that phase of back and forth for a little while. And the problem that you run into when you go backwards isn't necessarily your third-party applications and things like that. It's the other part of the Windows operating system, the modern apps, right? So understanding that Windows 10 in itself is actually kind of two operating systems jammed together into one being the core operating system in itself, and two being the modern app component of the operating systems. Yes, you can upgrade the modern apps up the chain. But when you try to go backwards and it goes, oh, that's an old version, everything falls apart. You try to open up Edge, it crashes. You try to open up sticky notes, it crashes. You try to launch the start menu, it might work, it probably won't. but it, you never know. That's kind of hit or miss. Search might blow up on you. .NET frameworks won't load correctly. Your ADLs will go sideways. So you really can't go backwards. Now, why can we get away with that? Well, one, I'm not trying to move over the entirety of the profile, right? I'm not trying to take that app data local directory and move that up the chain that has the modern apps. I'm letting Windows kind of re-register that. Or I'm pulling parts of those items like Edge or sticky notes or whatever I might need to retain as part of my profile. I'm pulling the pertinent parts out of the operating system and putting those pertinent parts back. But I'm not taking the entirety of the modern app and trying to move it back and forth. I'm just letting Windows re-register it and putting the items back down so that my settings are there, but not the entirety of the modern application. So that's the key here. That's how we're able to do these things, even when 7 to 10 or 8 to 10 or 2008 to 12 to 16 to 19, is that we're taking the important parts or the profile component parts of the operating system out and moving those things up and down the chain where necessary. So again, it's not an all or nothing approach with profiles. It's the most important parts. So next slide, please.
That's great, Jack. So, I mean, so we can't just, back in XP, like when I moved from machine to machine, I could literally copy my entire profile and then paste it into the other machine, and that would work. But, it wouldn't work if you did that from XP to 7, and it won't work from 7 to 10. So if you take a static profile tied to the operating system and you try to paste it in, it won't work, obviously. There's other methods that are on the market today that make a profile available in its whole form, like a profile disk, and we have one of those, right? But you have to think about that as being like, that's not a use case to solve what we're talking about here, because that's like a static profile that's like slammed into an operating system. And what happens, Jack, if you were to try to take a profile disk, even from us, or from anybody in the industry, and you pasted it in or you brought it into the session, what would happen in that session?
Up the chain, you're fine.
Yep.
Going back down the chain, on the other hand, your modern apps go absolutely sideways and they end up breaking the operating system. So it really is, if you, again, to my point, if you plan on moving up, you'll be fine. But again, in most organizations, this isn't like we were doing 20 years ago, where on the weekend we're going to update everybody to the latest version of Windows, and on Monday everybody's going to just be on the next version. There is a lot of testing going on during these phases, right? Because, not to, poke the bear that is Microsoft, but the 1809 release didn't go well at all, right? That was a great example of not every release of Windows 10 always works. Not every in-place upgrade is gonna be perfect, right? They even had to pull it off, and the LTSCs had to be pulled down. They had to rework it and put that back out there. Can you imagine? We did a Windows 1809 upgrade across the entirety of my VDI environment, logged in the next day, and everything just chewed itself up. Oh my God. There would be a lot of panic going on, and you'd be rolling back really quick, but then what would have happened? Your profile would be dead. The whole thing gone, and you'd have to start over again. Where with a portability function, you just go back. It wouldn't hurt anything.
So you can move up the chain once you're in the V6 range, right?
That is correct.
But you can't move up the chain necessarily from what we're talking about today at Windows 7 for this migration to this.
Actually, you can move up when you hit 1703 or higher. Okay. Even if you're in 1607. 1607 is actually the same build that you see on Windows 2016, and it's the same build that you see on the LTSB release. So you, in fact, cannot even move from 1607 2016 LTSB to the next version, the 1703 release, because it's incompatible.
But when you get to here,
then you're generally okay, as long as you do not go backwards.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. But you can't move up from these older versions to here.
That is correct.
Obviously. So that's one of the main use cases we're talking about today. 7 to 10, you need something to be able to make a dynamic profile. Otherwise, you have to use the user state migration tool, which will massage the profile, harvest out certain things, and make certain things compatible one way only, and users down.
That is correct. Yes. Again, it doesn't really it doesn't fit into the testing phase, right? It's once you're done, there's no going back.
Right.
Where we have that option to roll back if there's an issue.
All right. A little bit more detail on that.
Yep. So as you can kind of see here in this slide, the various different builds and revisions of Windows 10 have different expiration dates, right? So long gone have gone the days of, well, I'm going to stay on Windows, Windows 7 for the next 15 years, or I'm going to stay on XP for 19 years. That's gone. Microsoft evolves the operating system every year and a half. In fact, they even put out an operating system every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an expiration date. If you're on the spring releases, 18 months. If you're on the fall releases, it'll last you 2.5 years or 30 months. Now, in IT, a year and a half is a drop in the bucket, right? You're probably going to be testing for 6 months, and then you have a viable operating system for a year. Or if you're going to go down the other route, you have a viable operating system for 2 years, and then you're going to go through the whole testing phase. But Microsoft also has a habit of introducing new features that are exclusive to the latest revisions of the operating system. Probably the best example was OneDrive. If you're on an operating system that's prior to, I believe, 1709, you don't get to use the OneDrive stubbing function because that was part of the operating system updates, where if you're on an LTSB, you can't do it. All files come down. If you're on 1703, you can't do it. All files come down. So moving to these new revisions is incentivized by Microsoft for you to keep up with the latest releases versus sitting on an LTSB or an LTSC, for example, for the foreseeable, 7-year span that they're supported.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft really would not want you to do that, right? They are going to make it hard for you to do that. In fact, they even announced 2019 is only compatible on certain operating system types because they do not want you to stay on the old builds, right? Because as you can imagine, their help desk calls, "Hey, are you on the latest release?" Right? That's all software companies are like that.
Right.
So if they either A, incentivize you, or B, force you to keep up with the latest releases of the operating system, security patches, features, etc., now you have to have that profile be able to go up the chain. So you're going to be kind of in a little bit of a flux of test to new build, because there's going to be some feature where you'll go, we need to have it. We need to test for it. We need to be able to go to that next revision. But while we're in that sort of mid ground, we need to be able to go back and forth.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Just a side note in the sidebar, a few years ago, couple years ago, someone pointed out to me the version numbers, and I've actually told a few other people. Some people realize this and some people don't. Let's look at this. 1809. It literally means the date that it was first made available, maybe as a preview, because it will match up very closely to this date you see. September, the month, and the year, 18.
Yeah. Microsoft has been trying to get away from that naming scheme because they keep slipping. So they're calling them spring and fall releases now, but they still keep the signal. They still do keep the signifier names.
Yeah, I've at shows I've actually shared that with a few people, and they're like, "Oh gosh, you taught me something I didn't know either." So I didn't know I didn't know. Maybe a little embarrassed to say, but I learned that a couple of years ago. But maybe some other people on the call today on the webinar have learned something new too. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
So beyond the user profile, really, and where our product gets its name, ProfileUnity, is that it is really bringing together the parts of Windows that truly make it unique. And that is the user profile, parts of the registry that make up the user profile, and also little settings in the session itself. You see at the far right, I've got a printer that's highlighted that maybe the person mapped up themselves. That stuff's in the user profile and the registry and the combination thereof. And at user log off, generally what happens when you're using our magic profile portability or profile bridge, what happens is all this data, all this goodwill profile and everything else that makes the user session seem like it's persistent. It gets compressed and then moved up to file share, an SMB file share, and or as of just a few months ago, we now support object-based storage, where you don't even have to have a file share to save this data to the cloud of your choice. Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, to be able to save this data out there and then to bring it back down. So these are the parts that ProfileUnity really tracks. This, in addition to the policies that are assigned from the management console that go beyond group policy management. To get started with a migration configuration that will be right for your organization is very easy with ProfileUnity. As a matter of fact, you can download this solution today to try it, to do your own proof of concept. We have a hosted proof of concept program too, if you're interested in that. You can shout out and let us know, or send us email to sales at Liquidware, and we'll get you hooked up with a hosted proof of concept program, so you don't have to even spin up your own environment. You can use ours. But if you downloaded ProfileUnity this afternoon, you started your own pilot or proof of concept, you'll be faced as part of the installation process with a choice to make. What does your Windows environment look like? So then you're asked to choose what operating systems that you're running and what type of operating system you are running. And you see, we're truly in the management business of adaptive workspace management. You'll see other solutions supported out here that you maybe didn't know that we supported at all. Amazon Workspaces, AppStream, Citrix, VMware, RDS servers. We take into account all these. One of these configurations is going to be right for your environment to help you have a profile that will generally go across all these operating systems, backwards and forward, to take into account also key folder redirections and to migrate that user data out of them. That bit's set up, and you can turn on the final bits if you want reporting to come back centrally for that. But out of the box, you'll have great functionality without even having to know the product forward and backward, because we back up those specific parts of Windows and then restore them very efficiently at the next login to help bridge the profile, the unity of that entire profile across desktops. You've heard me speak about user-authored data, which is by default, it's part of the logical areas to store this as part of the user profile. My document shell folders like My Documents, pictures, videos, and things like that. This is where we take into account this with a feature set that we do folder redirection. Now that sounds pretty simple, but we go well beyond just your basic folder redirection to be able to harvest the data out of those locations, even if you've already redirected them today. So we basically look at the system registry for the machine that the user's logged onto. We know where the user authored is today, and user authored data path is today for My Documents, whether it's local or whether it's already on an SMB somewhere. And then you can redirect it to a new location that you would put in here, and even if that's in the cloud, and then we can sync those files to a new location. This happens in the background, keeping users productive. No user state migration tool that gives downtime. No import process happens in the background. The next login, when all this synchronization has occurred, and you can do excludes if you've got big files in there you want to leave behind, like MPEGs and things like that. The next login, when this has occurred, we'll do a quick foreground sync in case they've created a file or two while this was happening in the background. And then we'll switch the folder redirection on. And this is, again, this is for user-authored data files, such as My Documents being the best example. And then your user-authored data is then uncoupled from the old user profile and also from the old hardware, and it is synced fully to best practices on the network. Now, we do an inventory of this too. So you can have this report back to our management console, which is here in the background of the screenshot, and it will tell you what users have finished this on which parts of their hardware that so if they have multiple machines, that they've completed My Document Sync for their computer named XYZ here and PQR over in the other area, and that you are ensured that that process has indeed occurred. So user authored data is done that way. The profile happens automatically at first log off. So let's talk about large profiles, okay? It was a profile consideration as we talked about user profiles. Large profiles and considerations under that may include like the Office 365 cache, OneDrive cache, and things like that. Well, ProfileUnity has a profile disk that's built in that you can also use. So far I've been talking about our portability of a profile that will hive a profile in registry and bring it back just in time across OS. And that's exclusive, but we also have a profile disk, and it indeed is tied to a profile version. If you had one in Windows 7, you could also have one in Windows 10, and you could use our portability profile technology to bring those settings across as a sense of profile bridge across operating system versions. Now, our portability, it's important to note, works with other profile container solutions in the industry. Any of those through Citrix, through VMware, through Microsoft, or anyone else in the industry, you can run our core ProfileUnity feature set and portability in conjunction with those, and you get the same effect. But we have a profile disk built in that does that if you want to standardize on that, or work with the one that you already have. It brings back a large profile very quickly, so you have a great user experience, especially helpful in VDI environments where you may have a non-persistent desktop but want a large persistent profile to come across. The application challenge in your migration, how can you get a complete inventory of applications in use? How do you know which applications are going to be compatible with the new OS? Is there a new way to handle application delivery? We can handle those too as well. There may be applications that aren't compatible, so that's a challenge. Applications may not be compatible with your new way of delivering your desktops, and now is the time to think about a new way of application delivery. So, you know, AppV from Microsoft and ThinApp have been out there for quite some time. There are newer application technologies like our FlexApp application layering that are out there and available and can deliver those applications just in time, and also applications that will go across operating system version. Now, with the application challenges, our solution Stratusphere can be very helpful. It can be put in place in your existing Windows deployment environment, and that could be physical, virtual, or cloud, and start to glean information back and report it to our central database to where you're able to run these easy to use reports out of here. Here I have a report of application usage in an environment. Now, it's good to know what applications are installed, and we can see that too, but this is application usage, and you start to get a feel for what applications are in use in an environment and how many users are using them and which departments they are in. So you can do an application installed versus usage. So there may be applications that you do not need to bring along in the environment that no one's using, and you can prove that out on a departmental basis and start to use that to either build your base images or to deploy your applications in a new method, such as through FlexApp layering. Here's another area where we've looked at applications that can be virtualized. And so we take a look at this application virtualization report, and we can run through a list of applications out there, and we can look at application complexity and whether it has a high complexity rating. So you may not want to use it for application virtualization like AppV or ThinApp, but you might want to think about that more for application layering, which has a very high chance of delivering an application. Or you may want to reserve those to deliver in the base image or through SCCM, through traditional install means. We mentioned hardware too. How do you know that your hardware costs are kept in check during your migrations, ensuring your compatibility? How can you get a complete list of inventory of those in use? How can you determine which ones can run Windows 10? And should you move some of those physical desktops over to virtual platforms? Is this the right time? There's more options than ever for virtual desktops in the market. And so you want to explore your options there, as we've already spoken about at least once today. How do you size storage and user data and things of that nature? And Stratusphere can help you in these challenges as well. We have a hardware compatibility report, which does, you can do clicks deeper than this, but this is a high level look at your hardware. Which hardware may be compatible with the new environment you're going to, for instance, to a 64-bit operating system versus a 32-bit operating system and applications that are built especially for those use. And here we're looking at a hardware operating system compatibility report, and this strikes more to the heart of what we're talking about today. Can my hardware run Windows 10? We have this report already purpose-built in here, so you can look at a PC by PC basis, whether or not the hardware, in here I see one that's ideal. This hardware right here is ideally equipped to run Windows 10 and is ideally equipped for Windows 10 compatibility. But you see the majority of the hardware here in this organization that has been inventoried is not ideal for Windows 10, but you can identify, and when you're talking about thousands of machines across an enterprise, you can save a lot of money by knowing which hardware can be repurposed for Windows 10 without just going out and blanketly buying new PCs. Here's a more broad machine summary that Stratusphere can glean across. As you see, the machine name here is to the left, and how you're delivering that machine, whether it's a hardware or a virtual instance, is the next column. You can see the machine model, make, serial number in your BIOS, and you start to learn a lot of other data in here, so you can see whether or not some of these things support Windows 10. As you look to TPM, is it active or enabled? And some of these things are very integral in here, because Windows 10 has this new security feature which requires TPM. It's called a Trusted Platform Module, TPM 2.0, and so it can leverage the extensible firmware interface. And this report shows this at a glance. So it also shows your machine age based on the BIOS date, which, as you know, rarely gets updated. So you can rely on it for machine age in most cases. Here we have a storage sizing report that can help you with the user profile by user and group, and get a feel for how large of storage you need to allocate for each individual user. So you see here 13 gigabytes of data needed for this user. So this can be very helpful when you're moving to a profile container from any vendor, being able to size that, because that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Jack, we spoke about that earlier today, the challenge in sizing out profile disks or profile containers from any vendor. And this report can be used to help get a good feel for that, to know what you're in store for. So FlexApp comes in for delivering applications, as I mentioned earlier, and the strengths of delivering applications through FlexApp, which is a layering technology. It is not a virtualization technology, which I describe more as applications in a bubble or isolated applications. FlexApp layering has a very high degree of compatibility for applications, and the magic in your Windows 7 to 10 OS movement is that once you package an application for even Windows 7, in almost all cases, it will move across and support Windows 10. You'll need to test that. A lot of that's dependent on the vendor supporting Windows 10 in the first place. It doesn't do any magic. If the vendor didn't support Windows 10 with that application, it's not going to solve that use case. But it will keep you from having to repackage applications for every operating system version. Not all application layering solutions in the market can do that. You can reduce your number of base images, and this is especially helpful in RDS environments, Microsoft WVD environments that's coming on soon. Public preview starts today of that. It's also helpful even in physical desktop environments where you're doing base image management, so you can have an easy way to deploy new machines or new hardware, or to manage your RDS boxes, because with a layering technique, you're able to snap applications in dynamically, even hot add them into environments like RDS by using our click to layer technology and other technologies that we've developed. So if you look at the migration time saved across the board, we've done an ROI calculation out here where if it's taking you a minimum of 2 hours per desktop with something like user state migration tool, and oftentimes it can take that much, you can save a dramatic amount of money. You multiply that by the smallest of enterprises at 500, at $30 an hour, you come up with a savings of $30,000 just in labor alone for that. But if you look at the ROI calculation, you see that the payback is very quick. Now, we have an ROI calculator that is available. If you'll reach out to us, we can provide you a copy of that, where you can run your own calculations and you can see your own projected savings from automating a migration compared to other solutions that rely on user state migration, which would experience downtime, and of course have you experience working over weekends to get users ready for the next desktops. We talked about the challenges at the beginning of this webinar, and to ensure a seamless Windows 10 migration, I'd like to summarize that if you assess your legacy desktops and applications, and you've designed the right environment, and Stratusphere can help you do that, you'd be on your way to success. If you leave, make sure you leave no mission critical data behind by harvesting user authored data and user profiles in the background with zero user downtime. You are taking great steps to a successful migration. Knowing how to prepare your base image based on the applications that were used in the legacy environment, whether or not they're being used in your new application strategy, that helps as well in getting you across. Ensuring that user author data is universally available, whether it's coming down from the cloud and you've got the right folder redirections in place, that not only you harvested it off, but now you've made it available in the new environment seamlessly. Obviously, that keeps users productive along the way. And then the files are backed up, whether that's just in typical backup on SMB servers or in the cloud using our new object-based storage and leveraging things like OneDrive, I should say, and Dropbox for Business. Monitoring the user experience along the way with Stratusphere can help validate and monitor that the desktop that you're delivering now is better than the desktop that the user had in the past. And that's where you can measure the success of your Windows 10 deployments. We did a survey a few months ago on ProfileUnity and how our customers, which represent now businesses in the thousands of numbers, and then obviously users in the tens of thousands or millions of numbers now, hundreds of thousands to millions of numbers, how this looked, how ProfileUnity moving them across and ensuring a seamless migration or ending the migration cycle would have helped compared to user state migration tool. And as you see here, when you compare it against that, our customers told us that through automation, it was at least a 95% better in their opinion than user state migration. Speed, 90%. Reliability of making sure everything was done and reporting back to a central location, 92% felt it was better than manual means or user state migration. Reporting all that back so you knew at a moment's notice how the track and progress was going was integral to 92% of participants of the survey. And then the ease of use, of course, was very integral. So scored very high in a survey that we recently did compared to user state migration. I'd like to show what we call our ultimate demo. Our ultimate demo of what ProfileUnity and FlexApp, for example, can do for you, and Stratusphere obviously monitoring the user experience across that environment. I want to show you how easy it is for the end user. When I talk about a seamless zero user downtime experience, I'm talking about what you're about to see here. We can provision out wallpaper through a standard in ProfileUnity to push a wallpaper to the desktop. Users may also, after migration, bring their own wallpaper, but what you just saw there is an example of provisioning the wallpaper that would have been done centrally. And the user in Windows 7 here has access to their Windows 7 desktop. So we've got this user under management, and they're adding a bookmark in here, and they may have dozens and dozens of bookmarks that keep them productive and shortcuts to SaaS applications and so forth. They open up an application on their desktop that's actually been layered to the desktop and packaged for Windows 7. With Windows 7, and now they're changing something in there, and that is actually a profile change that was made in Windows 7. They changed the way a spell checker would work in Foxit Reader. So that's a profile change in a layered application. So two things that work there. They open up their Outlook and they see that they've got all the email in there, and this is a non-persistent machine that they're on, and this is brought in through a profile disk. Can also be brought in through a profile container through any vendor in the industry, and the rest of our technology that provides the Windows 7 to 10 and the full user environment management is keeps the user productive there across operating system versions. Indexing had already even occurred in that environment. And if you look at OneDrive, the user has 5 gigabytes of files in OneDrive, and those files are synced in this Windows 7 machine, and that's done on a profile container or profile disk from us, or through any other means, any other profile disk vendor out there. But what is the magic is making sure that that is consistent across operating systems. Remember, I told you that a profile disk or a profile container is tattooed to an operating system, especially from Windows 7 to 10, as Jack and I spoke about earlier. And when this user logs off, ProfileUnity runs, and it will hive out that profile to make sure that it will work across operating system versions. So there's two profile technologies at play here. That's our profile bridge at work there through our portability. And user state migration might take a couple of hours or more to have a user come across one way, one time only. But as you see here, in seconds, it was written back, and now the user is logging in. That same profile is going to be pulled into Windows 10. Not possible with other technologies, not possible with profile containers alone, like our profile disk. But when matched with profile portability, you'll see the magic come in here, and ProfileUnity runs at login, In just a few seconds, this user has not even had to go through a migration. You have made the profile, made sure the profile is compatible. And if you think about what FlexApp is doing, FlexApp applications that were packaged for Windows 7 are now working with Windows 10. That's right, they don't have to be repackaged. See how those applications hit the desktop, or this Windows 10 desktop? This user's never logged on to before this particular Windows 10 desktop. They do have a profile disk already populated because they've logged on to another one before, but they've fully populated here, and all those settings that we made earlier indeed have come across as well. Even I'm opening up a layered application that was packaged one time. Windows 7, it actually works in Windows 10. And you see even that spell check there. That came from Windows 7 to 10. That's an application data preference, and it came across as well. And if you look at the browser, you'll look at the bookmarks that we made. Those came across as well too. And they come across from Internet Explorer to Internet Explorer. Different versions of Internet Explorer, and you've got your bookmarks in there. It would be dozens, of course, for a user that's in productive and managed appropriately. We've got our bookmark in here, and now we could open up Microsoft Edge, and those bookmarks would be asked if you want those to come in. So you could be all the way through Edge once you're in the Windows 10. And let's check and see how, when this is paired with a profile container technology from us or any other vendor, you see that the entire profile has then come into the environment and that the user is immediately productive in Outlook. Thousands of emails have been made available and also already indexed. So not only has the profile come across Windows 7 to 10, applications came across from Windows 7 to 10. The Outlook came across, as well as this OneDrive cache that you just saw coming here. 5 gigabytes of files are ready to use. And that's because we've hosted them out in a cloud storage area. Cloud storage area of your choice, Google Cloud, Amazon, or Microsoft, and to be able to bring those down to the desktop. All right, so that's our ultimate demo and how we provide value above and beyond static profile technologies that work with one operating system version. Shows off our FlexApp technology, as well as showing off access to profile settings across OS and user-authored data access. We have a white paper out there that will step you through these challenges and tell you how to get started very quickly from your Windows 7 to 10 migration. And now you should see another shortcut that'll be in your window shortly, and you can get that white paper. It's free for use. We do ask for a few details about you if you want to download that. And we'd encourage you to download that free white paper. Again, the link will be in the chat window within GoToMeeting. I'd like to open up the opportunity to again bring Jack back in, because we'll entertain questions that have been submitted in the chat window. And if you haven't submitted those yet, be glad to have those questions addressed at this time. And Ray Swanson's still on, and he's been monitoring those questions as they come through.
Sure. Let's just cover a few of them real quick. And one of them says, how does this work with roaming profiles?
Oh, great question. So a roaming profile, older technology, it's the most basic way to make a profile roam across Windows versions, is a good way on a fast network to have a profile come across, but it's largely outdated really in its approach, because you're bringing the entire profile across, not in a compressed state. You're bringing the profile across all the way to the endpoint. We have a 50-to-1 compression ratio. So we compress it and then move it across the network. Roaming profiles does not have that. So you're going to get a very slow login usually with roaming profiles. You're also going to be limited to the user space and not be able to do includes of the profile. So things down to system root or system drive or program files or poorly written applications, you can add those in with us. Now, interestingly enough, if you're running roaming profiles, you're probably also experiencing profile corruption from time to time, a half-written profile. You won't get that with ProfileUnity. And you can do profile rollbacks even if there's an error in the profile, because we have Hive versions of the profile, or archive versions, I should say, of the profile that you can bring back into the user environment as an admin to restore those and have the user log back in. But we can pick up a roaming profile if that's what you're using today. We can solve all those things that I just pointed out. And what you do is you just leave roaming profiles on and running, implement us, we'll pick up the roamed profile, And then once everyone's logged on and off at least one time, you can turn off roaming profiles and be in ProfileUnity. Roaming profiles also does not go cross OS. It is tied to an operating system version, especially from Windows 7 to 10. So it's not going to work for our migration like you saw today. That was a great question. Thank you.
Here's another one. Someone asked, would the ProfileUnity migration include registry keys under the current user?
Yes, it includes registry keys under the current user. And also, ProfileUnity is very powerful because you can lay down registry keys at any level. If you've got a standard user, you can lay down specified registry keys from our registry feature module to help manage the desktops. You know, this is aside from the user profile. It might affect the user profile, but you can lay down registry keys at an HKLM local machine level. And as you know, you probably know you have to be an administrator to do that. That's because ProfileUnity runs with admin privileges, and this sets it apart from a lot of tools in the market that can't do that. So that effectively lets you lock down machines. You can manage the registry at a higher level. For example, lay down a key that locks down USB storage where you can't save anything or execute anything from USB, and then a standard user can't flip that switch back. So very powerful in that area, not only making registry keys portable, but also being able to manage registry keys at any level.
Great. Someone asked, for ProfileUnity, can we deploy multiple profiles at once? Like for, I think maybe for the same user? I'm not sure exactly how that.
Yeah, good question. I think what they might be asking, and they can ask again or specify in the questions, can this same user log into Windows 7 and 10 or maybe even multi-session? And the answer is yes. Today, the majority of what we spoke about was portability, and our portability will support multiple users logged in, multiple desktops, and to get around what used to be discussed in the industry is a last right wins. So when one logs off, you make sure that it's tied back. We have trigger points that can help do more frequent saves of the profile, and we also do delta differential restores of the profile. So if a user doesn't touch an area of a profile on one machine they're logged in, it's not going to overwrite what they have touched on the other machine. So we absolutely minimize last right wins down to the degree that anyone in the industry does, and you can have multiple users logged in.
Okay, great. Here's a question about FlexApp. How does it know to install a newer version of an installed app?
That's a good question. So you may have heard me point out that once you package an app for FlexApp, that it is compatible across OS. I'm not sure that's what they're asking, but it'll work for Windows 7, 10, and even the server versions. If the vendor supports it, and we do ask that you test it, but usually those apps will work across without repackaging them. Now, how do you do an update? Maybe that's what they're asking. An update in FlexApp can be done of one or two ways. You can open up the app package, and you can run the modify part of the installer from that application, or you can simply install the new version of it and repackage it. It only takes a few seconds to package a FlexApp. Literally, it takes the same time as to install it. So you can install a new version of it, and then at the next login, by default, the user you could program it. You could put in parameters that the user would get the new. You could retire the old configuration, which will get the old version out and the new version into the session. There's other means of doing that through through click to layer. It doesn't really update it, but you can do hot adds of applications into an environment. You wouldn't want to put the same application into an environment twice, obviously, but you can deploy applications even without rebooting RDS servers with our exclusive click to layer tech.
Someone asks, is there a central location to easily manage, edit users' profile using ProfileUnity?
To manage the users. Not sure I understand the question. Did you, Jack?
Yeah. So you're not necessarily managing the users directly because the ProfileUnity system is not a traditional client-server type model, right? Agent does not talk to the ProfileUnity server for user information and try to process it down through a database or whatever that happens to be. The profile data is actually on the file share. So you're not necessarily managing the user in the sense of I'm going to do something to the user live right now. You're managing the user in the same sense of like a group policy or a roaming profile. You've set the parameters, the user logs in, the settings apply to said user. So it really generally is that hive in and hive out. There are some exceptions to that rule, obviously with trigger points where triggerable entities can then enact certain settings, but you're not necessarily doing management in that client server model that you might be thinking.
An example though that we could affect, as I think through the question a little more as you have addressed it well, is that if you want to roll out a registry key that appends to their profile or overwrites something to treat so that the profile actually has a change in the registry key in it to change an application behavior, for example, or something, you can push that out. So our registry, as I stated before, registry management is very, very powerful, running with admin privileges, and as such, you can merge, exclude, or replace any registry key by group, or even you could set up a filter to do it by an individual user. So you could modify the profile through that means.
Another common method, because I think I've seen this question before, is if I need to make an exclusion to the profile, how do I prune said data out? The way that ProfileUnity works is if you do make an exclusion to the rule sets, like Chrome, and Chrome has another cache directory structure, you can put that Chrome exclusion into the rule set, and then what happens is that when you log in, it's going to load the whole thing. When you log out, it'll save out with that exclusion in, so the archive itself will actually self-prune. So you don't actually have to go and edit anybody's system because it will self-prune itself to the proper size with a simple login and out of the user.
Good question.
I'm seeing quite a few questions about how ProfileUnity is licensed.
That's a good question. We usually answer that question with a question: how do you want to license it? Because almost always our answer is yes. We can license per user, and we can license concurrently. It's up to you, and the prices obviously vary a little bit depending on how you would want to do that. But in recent versions, we've incorporated a license server, so we can be very accurate on concurrent user count, knowing which users are logged in, which ones are taking a license, and which ones are not. So if you do concurrent, we've got new options in there as of the last few months ago, and just inquire with us how you'd like to. And we also have everything up to an enterprise license agreement for the biggest of organizations that have tens of thousands of users. So anything's a possibility in that regard. But it is a perpetual license. Maybe that's the question too. You pay a perpetual license fee, one-time fee, and then there are maintenance. The first year is included, and then in its industry standard is what we're in line with, the 20% the second year or third year, and you can buy some of that up front, and you would be covered on that. And then there's also options now that there's cloud-based desktops to be able to do licenses as a service too. So know that those are available, and you can inquire for those scenarios.
I know we're over our time, but maybe we can just get in one or two more questions, and then we'll follow up with everyone that we didn't touch with. But someone asked, how scenario, how do I make sure the profile is available in DR?
Jack, you want to take that one?
Sure. So there's two methods. There's the standard active passive replication function that can be done in DR. You can set it up to do double writes and write to two path locations with the primary secondary. Double write basically means when it saves out to both the file shares at the same time, basically. And then within ProfileUnity, there is a primary secondary failover function. So if the primary site fails, it'll basically flip over to secondary. Or if you need something a little more, I don't know, fancier, if you will, we partner with a company called PureSync. PureSync can handle a true active replication functionality between Site A, Site B, Site C, and D. So it's not just SMB to SMB replication, but they can actually do SMB to cloud as well, or SMB to cloud. So if you really want to mix it all up and say, I have primary, secondary data center, and cloud storage, we can do primary as primary location, secondary and tertiary failovers in our good partners PureSync would be able to handle that middleman conversation of the data goes to all of these various different locations.
And then object-based helps with this too, right, Jack?
So that's what I'm saying is that we can do primary SMB, secondary object-based, or primary, secondary SMB, and or third object-based.
Yeah.
So again, with our good partners at PureSync, they can do replication to those various different targets, and then we can basically point to the various different targets based on is site 1, 2, or 3 down.
Good question.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up with this one. And someone asked, how do I get access to the hosted trial version that you mentioned?
Yeah, great question. If you go to our website, you'll see a tab there that will link you to the download area. It's a very short form. You fill it out and you're immediately put in the download area, and you can download what you want to grab is ProfileUnity with FlexApp, and you can test it from there. The minimum you want to have available to be able to test, by the way, is a Windows server, and that's where you'll want to execute this file that you'll download. You'll want to have preferably your proofs of concept to be a little bit isolated so you can play with it before you go production. You want to have a domain controller set up in there with Active Directory running, group policies, etc. So you'll have all the bits that you need to run. And then you'll need at least 1 or 2 desktops. If it's Windows 7 to 10, you'll need 1 of each to test this. A good way to do this is through Hyper-V or through VMware Workstation or something like that to be able to set up a few machines if you don't already have a lab that you can pilot this in. But an experienced system administrator can have ProfileUnity and FlexApp up and running within an hour and a half to 2 hours. If you take a break for lunch, it might take a little longer, but you can be testing most everything we showed today, and even we have cloud apps already layered, and you can play with those without even packaging an app now. That's a newer feature. I'll go ahead and say thanks so much for my part. Thanks for sticking with us through the end. I'd like to thank Jack Smith for joining us to have a voice from the field and also the profile expertise that he has. It's, like I said, as deep in the industry as you'll find anywhere. And I'd like to thank Ray Swanson for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. We just as a quick reminder, please keep an eye on your inbox for an email with a link to the recording and the slides in the days following the event. We'll also take any of the questions that we had out there and circulate them throughout our team, and we'll do our best to follow up with everyone after the presentation. Thank you very much.
You know what? If I could be so bold, they may have been asking about the hosted POC environment that we have. And I mentioned that earlier, a hosted POC environment, so you don't have to download any of this that I just stated. Reach out to us at sales@liquidware.com, and we'll get you in the hosted POC program where you can test all this as well.
Great. Thanks, Jason. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.